Katherine, how are you doing today? Thank you for coming on the Purpose of a Pension podcast. You had me on yours, and I'm very happy to be in a place to ask you the questions this time around.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be on your show, and I'm honored that you asked me, so can't wait.
Yes, yes, and I'm very happy to have you back. You have so many things going on. You're such an advocate for police officers. And I mean, the energy that you bring into the law enforcement realm without being a police officer or being in law enforcement yourself is second to none. And the community, I see the way it's growing around you and the way that people are supporting you. And it goes to show that you are such an asset to the law enforcement community. And I would just love to get a background and get a little bit of a understanding as to who you are, where you grew up, and how you became so involved in law enforcement as the LT's daughter.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you for all your kind words. That means so much to me. I really appreciate it. Um, so about me, I grew up in Philadelphia. My dad was Special Victims Unit lieutenant in Philadelphia for most of my life, most of my memory anyway. And then all of my uncles and several of my cousins were also Philadelphia PD. So I grew up around cops. I never really thought about it, gave it any mind. For a long time, I didn't even really know or understand what my dad did for a living beyond he helps people. I moved to New York City to work in fashion when I was 20 years old. So I lived there for a long time. And I always I would see the cops and I would think of my family. So I would give them a smile or a wave or what have you. And the longer I was there, I was just like, these people don't get enough support. And I want to do something to support them. And so I found myself Googling, how can I support police officers? And I never really got much from those Google searches beyond donate here, donate there, this nonprofit, that nonprofit. But I really wanted the men and women in law enforcement to know that I was a civilian who wanted to support them, wanted to be boots on the ground with them and in it with them as best I could. So again, nothing really came of those Google searches. I did make my way into the NYPD Citizens Police Academy, which was really cool. But then fast forward a few months, COVID hit and the riots started happening in May. And for me, it was really difficult to watch. Again, as you know, I was in New York. I had friends who were participating in the riots. I had people questioning me and my morals and who I was as a person. And then, of course, my social media was just inundated with the riots and things like that. And I couldn't wrap my mind around this concept of these people are someone's parents. This is someone's mother or father. And they're supposed to go home after this 18, 24-hour ridiculous shift of being treated like an animal. And they're supposed to go put their kid to bed or make dinner for their kid or just act like nothing happened. That it just wasn't computing in my mind. And I couldn't understand how these other civilians didn't see that or didn't understand that to any degree. And so the whole thing kept me up at night. It was a tough time for me, even though I wasn't actually out on the streets with them. And I wasn't sleeping. And one night I just had this moment where I was like, enough's enough. I have to do something, even if that means I have to start somewhere from scratch. So I was like, is a community for police officers a thing? I'm in a lot of Facebook communities. I benefit from them. I've seen people post small and big issues in them. Could that be something that I could do for police officers? And I started talking to active and retired officers to see if that would make sense, because I know they're a unique population that isn't necessarily something that they would, jump right into. And during these conversations, the theme that kept coming up was my relationship with my dad, because obviously I would introduce myself. I would tell them, my background, why I had an affinity towards police, and they would bring the conversation back to my relationship and how I spoke about my dad. And they were having these revelations on the call, like, my kid would never talk about me the way you're talking about your dad, or I can't say that I have the same relationship, or I don't talk to my kids. And so during these conversations, I was just like, holy cow, like this needs to change. And so after a lot of conversations and a lot of thought, I was like, I need to do something around the children because they're struggling and the relationships are struggling, and we're not recognizing it until they're old enough to walk out or walk away. And that's awful. So that's kind of how I came to really want to hone in on this concept of the children and the children's experience and what they're going through.
Wow, that's amazing. Very amazing. At what age did you realize what it is that your dad did and the sacrifice that he made for the community and also for his family?
So growing up, I knew, I was actually just talking to my brother about this. Our house was like the house that people would go to if they were in trouble, like the neighbor kids say, if someone was the babysitter on the block, they knew that if they needed help, they could come to my house because my dad would know what to do. And that never clicked for me. But when I was in 8th grade, my dad had a very high profile case about a little girl named Delamar Vera who had been kidnapped as a baby. And he helped reunite her with her biological mother. But that was very high profile. And it was also, since he worked in Special Victims Unit, a lot of the things he dealt with, he couldn't talk to us about. But that case was something that not only did we see everywhere, but it was something that he could kind of make a little bit more age appropriate for us. And so that's the first time that I really kind of grasped what it was that he was doing and maybe the magnitude that he was helping at. But to be honest, even to this day, I have a hard time kind of wrapping my mind around everything that he's seen, everything that he's done. Just the other day, I was talking to him and he was telling me some stories that he's never told me before because I have to try to pull them out of him gradually because he's still hesitant to share sometimes with me. And I was reflecting on some of those stories and I was just like, my dad did that? I just can't wrap my mind around some of the things that he's seen and done, even to this day at 35 years old.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And what was it that he demonstrated for your community to feel so comfortable with who he was, so that if they were in trouble or if they needed help in any way, what was it that he did to kind of polarize the thing and allow them to feel secure?
That's a good question. I think he was just very much a pillar. He was friendly with, all the neighbors. So all the adults, knew who he was and that he was a trusted person. So I think it probably came from them down to their kids. You can always go to the Boyles house if you need something or if you need help. This is a place where you can go. And through that, the kids just got to know him and got to trust him. And yeah, and he's one of those guys where everywhere we went, he ran into someone he knew. He always knew a guy. And he's just a very personable person. And people just like him and he's a nice person. And so I think that just through that trust through other adults, it just kind of made its way through the neighborhood.
And with him having that reputation, how did that affect you in a negative or a positive way? I would assume that a lot of people respected you. A lot of people may have known that your dad was a lieutenant or a police officer. How did that play a part in how people interacted with you off the strength of what he did for a career?
That's a good question. I'm not really sure. I think, in general, the house was known and just the family. But I don't know if it did affect that. And if it did, I never really put it together or thought about it, to be honest.
Yeah, the reason why I asked that question is because I know for me with growing up, if I knew somebody's father or mother was a police officer, it was like automatic respect, or it's like, oh, don't mess with him because you're going to be in trouble. But then also now, I think you mentioned it to me a while ago while we were speaking on social media, or I think we were talking about Robert Garland's interview that you did with him in regards to kids that are being bullied because their parents are police officers. So I just wanted to know what that dynamic was like for you, if there was any dynamic there pertaining to that.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I don't think it had a huge I mean, I guess there was like some of the older kids wouldn't necessarily come around or the older kids knew to maybe stay away.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess there was kind of that dichotomy there. But I also grew up in a different time. I grew up in the 90s and the 2000s. So kids respected police a lot more and they had like I said, our house was a safe house, a trusted house, a respected house, versus now it's like, your kid might get bullied for having cops for parents, or maybe they're like seen as the snitch kid, or like, don't go near that kid because he's going to get you in trouble, or things like that. I considered myself very lucky that I didn't grow up in that time, in this time. So I didn't really have that personally.
Great, great. What age were you when your dad first took you to the area or the community in which he served?
Mm. Well, Philadelphia is a big place, so he served in a lot of different areas, but some places I've still never been to this day. Um, and like I said, he was special victims for most of my life, so I guess we could talk about that. Actually, this is kind of a fun story. When I was little, take your daughter to work day was a really big thing. And I think it's still a thing, but I think it's take your child to work day.
Yeah.
But when I was growing up, it was like there would literally be a day where there were no girls in the class because they were all at work with one of their parents. And I was never allowed to participate and take your daughter to work day for obvious reasons. And it would always bum me out because I'd be like one of the only girls in the classroom. And so what my dad would do is he would arrange for a Saturday morning. He would take us down to the station when he could kind of control the situation. He would know who, if anyone, was in the holding cells, or, what people were working on, or who's going to be where. He couldn't control everything, but he could kind of have a bit of control over the situation. And it was like early on a Saturday morning, so he could pick the time. And he would take us down for a little bit where we could, walk around, see where he worked, look at the holding cells, meet some of the people who worked with and for him. And so he kind of made up for that through, taking us down on a Saturday a few times in my young childhood, maybe like third grade.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Now, your dad working in SDU, I would think that that's very demanding. It's a very demanding position, especially in a city like Philadelphia. What was your relationship like with your father as far as the amount of time that he was able to spend with you, his presence in your life? And was there a specific time or a period where it was less of an encounter with them, or uh, less time with them and less quality time with them as opposed to another period? And did that affect you in it?
So I know that there were several cases where he would have forced overtime, or he would be at, working, I was going to say at the office, working for long hours, more than like what I had been accustomed to. But overall, he was really good about, he would never take on unnecessary overtime. So like if it wasn't required, he wouldn't take it on. Which in turn, when it was required, it wasn't as big a deal because he was home most of the time. Now he's at work a little bit more. And to be honest, he was home as much as he possibly could be. And when he couldn't be, he went out of his way to be present or to have FaceTime with us. And I just made a post, you may have seen it, where there was like a season where he was working through the night. And in the morning, when he would get home, he would wake us up for school so that he could see us. He could help us get ready for school, have FaceTime, say hello, and then he would go to bed and my mom would take us to school. Um, so there was a lot of that where if he was required to be working or not able to go to the games or be at the holidays, he would kind of make it up in the little pockets that he could. So now, as an adult, when I look back, it appears in my memory that he was never gone. He was always there. But I think that that is the result of his presence being so strong when he could be, that's what my memory kind of sees and thinks of, if that makes sense.
Well, no, yeah, that makes total sense. So what you're saying is it might have been a period or times where he wasn't around often, but he made himself present when he was around.
Exactly. And then now in retrospect, it's like, oh, he was always around, but he actually wasn't.
Wow. Well, I think that's great because I know for me, with me being, with me being a police officer for 17 years, that there would be times where I would be tired. And it's like when I did have the free time, to be real with you, I just wanted to be alone.
Right.
And I go back and think how much that could affect my kids, them not seeing me. And then when they do see me, I isolate and I'm to myself. So I really think that that's important that you shared so that people, even if it's you setting aside or, a parent setting aside half hour to an hour, maybe 4 days a week, each day, just to insert themselves and be fully aware and not be distracted by their phones. I think that's really essential to have that memory burned or to have that interaction or those small interactions burned into them so that they're like, you know what, my father, my mother, they were always there and they were always present. So that I appreciate you sharing that. Now let me ask you this, with your dad being in SVU and sharing these stories, I know that he hasn't gotten into much detail because it's pretty gruesome, the things that he comes across. Did that instill a lot of fear in you? Did that make you walk around with your eyes a little bit more open and more aware about what's going on in the world? You being a female, growing up in Philly, or coming to New York City, did that make you more fearful in any?
No, it's interesting because, and I see on other police pages, like kids don't do sleepovers and things like that. But our parents were fairly lenient when it came to the rules that they instilled with us. And, whatever fear they may have felt because of what he saw at work, they didn't, that never really trickled down to us. We were taught various, and some people, I guess, would say that this is being paranoid and stuff, but we were taught various safety tips, check the back seat of the car before you get in, always have the car door locked, lock the front door behind you when you walk in. I have like a safety stick that goes under the door handle of my front door. And a big one was always like your attitude says a lot about how you present yourself. So always walk around confidently, even if you're not confident. So there were like various, I guess, safety tips and tactics that they kind of instilled upon us, but it was never out of fear. It was always just out of be ready. So no, and it's funny to think about, like when I think about living in New York and how fearless, I mean fearless I was, I'm like scared for me back then. Like, but I really could handle myself, and that attitude trick definitely saved my backside in more than one occasion. So no, never much with the fear, but always ready.
Right, right. And I don't think it's you being paranoid at all. I think if anybody has a parent that's in a profession, if they could give their kids tips on how to go about doing things to protect themselves, like say for instance, if your father was a doctor and he said,
Yeah.
this circumstance were to happen, this is what you do. If you need to give CPR, this is how you do it. It's not being paranoid, it's being prepared. And if you have a professional that is good at their job and they're able to teach you how to protect yourself, if it happens to be in law enforcement, then it is what it is. And you had a very viral post on
Yeah.
it's at what, like, is that like 2 million now? I know the last
It's at 2.6.
it's at 2.6. Can you just, it kind of deals with what it is that you just spoke about. Can you just,
Yeah. Yeah. So and that's kind of where like some of the civilians or people who have no insight into law enforcement are coming at me saying that I'm paranoid. But it's a post that talks about a few things that we did growing up and into adulthood that some of our friends didn't do. So we never had our first name anywhere. Like our first name would be on the inside of our textbooks even. It would never be like on our clothes or on our backpacks or anything like that. Initials only. Um, we would always like leave a light on if we were out of the house so that it would look like someone was home. And then we were taught to roll down all of our windows if we ever got pulled over by a cop. And so those were just things. Some of them our friends were taught. Most of them our friends were not taught. Most of the people in the comment section were not taught. But for a long time, I thought they were all just like common sense
right.
until I started like implementing them or talking about them and realizing that other people were not taught the same thing. So I was like, this is a fun, cute post. And so I posted it and it went off the rails, to say the least.
That's right. But you got a lot of trolls in there. And what I wanted to ask is, with you having those trolls in the comment section,
Yeah.
what is that? Do you realize that that's kind of what police officers have to deal with in a major way, like so often, especially with the riots and so many other controversies? How did it feel taking on all of that negativity?
Yeah. It was a lot.
And then kind of like, did it give you an idea, not to say that you took being a civilian for granted, or you think that us as police officers have had it easy because obviously you're an advocate for us, but with you being targeted off a simple post like that, right? You didn't do anything wrong. You're trying to inform people. How did that put things into perspective for you on how much negativity law enforcement has to deal with?
It was definitely a reality check. I mean, like I said, while I was watching the riots in real time is kind of when it initially hit me that people hate cops.
Yeah.
And because I actually never knew before the riots that people actually hated cops.
Really?
Yeah. That's how like blind I was. So that's when it initially hit me. And then this post, I think more so than what cops deal with, what stood out to me was how stupid people are and how gullible they are and how maybe not even stupid, how ignorant they are to just believe anything that they hear, to go with anything that fits what they want to feel or believe and not be open-minded at all. There were a few people in the comments where I encouraged a conversation. I DM'd one woman and like they wanted no part of it. I would get blocked. And so I think, I mean, it definitely emphasizes what cops have to deal with. But I think more than that, it really hit me how ignorant people can be and how stuck in their ways based on something that maybe they read on Reddit or however they were raised. So yeah, I think that's what really hit me.
Okay. I know when I was looking at the comments, I felt so bad because you're so polite, you're nice. I'm like, oh man, I really want to fight for her. But Now she got to go through it. She got to go through it. This is what it is that she wants to do and advocate for police officers. This is just part of the equation. But a lot of those comments, I was looking at it. I was just yawning. I was like, this is what we deal with on the daily. This is what I've had to deal with, you know, multiple times. But I know for you, it was like a big shock. But you
Yeah.
handled it well. And that's great.
Thank you. I really tried to, because some of them really did get under my skin. I mean, there were some people who like were threatening my life and the lives of my families. And I, those people for the most part, I just like blocked or deleted them.
Can
Um,
can you go a little further into details of what type of threats or what they were saying?
so, one person told me that I should get into a shootout with police and then lose. Um, another person said, another person said, suggested that my father, because he was a police officer, was the police officer who sexually assaulted her. Um, oh gosh, I blocked some of them out, I think. But some of them got really like violent or just downright disgusting.
Yeah.
Um, and I reported them, and Instagram was like, this doesn't go against our guidelines. So then I would just like block them. Um, but the ones who were more just like ignorant, like the people who were stating the false domestic violence statistics, and the people who were like, you know, with the pig emojis, or you know, the more like just ignorant people, I would try to like talk to them, address the false information that they were spewing, or ask them questions, or try to understand, or try to educate them, kind of like what Robert Garland and I had actually talked about. And it didn't go anywhere, of course.
Yeah.
But I tried not to let them win, because, and I think we may have talked about this in the past, is that concept that my dad always taught me, that he who angers you conquers you. And I was just like constantly reminding myself of that quote, like, don't let them get under your skin, because they can't conquer you.
Exactly. But the great thing about social media is that even though you might be going back and forth with somebody that's ignorant, there may be somebody that's on the fence, and you say you respond. There may be somebody that's on the fence and may have the same thought process as that other person, but the fact that you're sitting there and explaining it, I was like, okay, wow, she has a point. They might not comment on it, they might not like it,
Yeah.
but by you being vocal and speaking on it, we could be changing a lot of people's opinions. And I don't want to just focus on the negativity of the post. Obviously, it reached 2.7 million views for a reason. How did it feel to get the feedback and the participation in the positive?
Amazing. I mean, to your point, I almost turned off comments at one point because they were just starting to get to me and distract me. And I was like checking them constantly and just having anxiety. So I almost turned them off. But I was talking to my husband, and he was like, you can turn them off if it's going to, you know, make you feel better. But if you, you know, keep them on or keep the conversation open, you could really be helping people. You know, you could be changing other people's minds or giving other people things to think about that they otherwise wouldn't. And so I left them on for that reason. And like you said, they're not going to speak up. So who knows? But 2.67 million, there's no way that I didn't, to be honest. That there's someone out there who is rethinking their beliefs, I think.
And, and not only that, the safety measures that a lot of people did not know, they're now seeing it. I mean, me being a police officer for 17 years, I learned some tips in there.
Yes.
2.6 million people that are seeing your advice, and they're also seeing their advice. I mean, I posted something in there as well, and they had no idea because they're just innocent. They think that the world is, you know, is perfect and that nothing
Yeah.
can happen to them. But you educated a lot of people, and I think that's what's most important to remember when it comes down to what it is that you're doing, is that there's going to be a lot more people that are positive and into what you're doing than the ones that are negative. And to be honest with you, I think even the people that are negative are into what it is that you're doing, but their mindset is just so screwed up that they have to stay in a certain a certain space. So
Yeah, and to your point, there was more positive than there was negative, and there were a lot of people sharing safety tips. The idea wasn't that they were all safety tips. The first two just happened to be safety tips, and then people perceived the third one as a non-safety tip. Um, but there were a lot of people sharing a lot of really interesting tips. I mean, even the children of firefighters were in there sharing like fire safety tips. There was a detective in there who shared a ton of really cool information. And then there were people connecting over the information, which was really cool to see. Just people like, oh, I didn't realize that. And then asking a follow-up question to get more information, or what do you think I should do in this situation? And then they're over here connecting on that. And that was like really awesome to see and to still see. So that definitely outweighed the pig emojis.
there you go. There you go. Yeah, think about everything that you do. What does he think about your move?
He thinks it's really cool. I think to a degree he doesn't understand it because, he's of a different generation. So this concept of being on social media and promoting things on social media, I think doesn't necessarily click. But what he does understand, obviously, the sharing my experience, the notion of connecting with your children as a police officer, he loves. It's definitely something that he indirectly supported as a supervisor. He was very lead by example. I connect with my family. You should do the same kind of a thing. He's obviously seen a lot of what I talk about, a lot of the negative that I talk about. So he knows that there's a need for it. So he, from that perspective, he loves it and he thinks it's really cool. But then the fact that I'm like kind of doing it on social media, I don't think really makes a whole lot of sense to him.
Yeah, that makes sense. Being a child of a lieutenant, what was the dynamic like between your mom and dad? Are they still married?
They are still married. They actually last week they celebrated 40 years. So good timing. They are still married. I don't know what happened behind closed doors, but from, my perspective, there was never any problems in the home. We were always like, I compare us to like Beaver Cleaver. They were always very much a team. We always saw them as a team. They supported one another. To this day, when I, poke and prod and ask all the questions, it would be like my dad would come home after night shift and take over as dad when we were little, when we had babies. Actually, this is a perfect example. We were talking about the night that my cousin was killed in the line of duty. My dad came home. My brother was born almost exactly 1 week before that happened. And that night, my dad came home around midnight, 1 o'clock from his shift, and took the baby, my brother, from my mom so that she could go to bed. And then while he was taking care of the baby is when the call came through. But I think that just kind of goes to show you that like he would come home and be a dad. He wouldn't come home and be another burden or, go right up to bed. He always had that mindset of like, we're a team. I have a really stressful, tough job, but, my wife was home with the kids all day. So I'm going to take some stress off of her plate and hold the baby for a few hours so she can get some sleep.
Oh, man. I might have to interview your dad and figure out how he's even think all of this happened.
Yes, please do. Please do. I would love that. I try to ask him the questions, but like I said, I think because I'm his daughter, he's a little bit, like, he doesn't want me to like, worry or wonder. So he doesn't open up as much. So if you can get him to open up.
Well, I just want to let you know that you're very blessed to have a father like that, because within my experience and even myself, I kind of stated before, sometimes I will come home and I just don't want to be bothered. My wife, she's dealing with the kids and stuff like that. And it's like I still got to just empty everything out of my head and, out of my embodiment, just focus on myself. So for your parents to still be married, for you to come from a very positive household, for people in your neighborhood to look up to your family. You do not understand how blessed you are. Or maybe you do. Maybe you do. I don't want to assume that you don't. But because the dynamic that I see with many police officers within New York City, there's not much, especially with the men, which is the majority of it. There's not much of a family dynamic. And if there is, there's a lot of coping mechanisms that come into play. There's a lot of stress and burdens that are put on the family as a result of the demand of the job. So to hear everything that you're saying, it almost like, of course, I believe you, but it's like that's amazing. It's great, and man, I respected that because he's obviously he's put in work in the police department, but it seems like the same amount of work that he's put into the police department, he's put in to play at home as well.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And I will say my whole life growing up, I always said, if I ever have kids in the future, I will only do it if I know I can do it the way my parents did it. Because I always felt like they did a great job raising us. We always felt loved. I mean, this is like before I understood what he did for a job. I just thought like they know what's up. They know how to do this. And if I ever do it in the future, I want to replicate what they did.
You yourself have never thought about entering law enforcement.
I mentioned it once when I was like young, and it was like kind of comical. And then when I did the Citizens Police Academy, before I did the Citizens Police Academy, I was like, do you think I could do this, Dad? And he was like, I'm not so sure. To give context, my background is in fashion, and I am scared of everything. So I don't know that I would be the best cop, to be honest.
What do you mean by that? You say you're scared of everything.
Like, okay, this is so random. And my family makes fun of me all the time. So it's kind of funny that it's coming up now. My biggest fear, and this sounds ridiculous, but my biggest fear is throw up. And like as a street cop, maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't, but it's like a risk that I would not be willing to take.
To encounter somebody throwing up?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay. The reason why I asked that is because you said you walk the streets in New York City with no fear, right? Like you were good. You never had any type of something.
But I also never had to like deal with somebody robbing a convenience store or like somebody who is armed.
Yeah, true. But yeah, I mean, everybody has their small things. I've seen people, police officers that pass out because they see blood. So everybody has their small things. But is that why your dad said that? Is because he knew the little fears that you had that might.
Yeah, and I'm just like, I'm a very sensitive soul, I think, and very small things can bother me. So I'm much better as like a spectator, I guess. I don't know.
Okay.
I just, yeah, I don't think that I could deal with some of the things that cops deal with. But it's also like my dad was never in favor of us getting into law enforcement. So it was always kind of like, if that's really what you want to do, like I can offer you some insight. I can tell you about the job, but he was not in favor of it.
Got you. Well, let me ask you this. Your husband, he's a veteran, correct?
He is, yeah.
All right. How would you compare him being a veteran to your dad being a veteran police officer, a veteran in the military? What kind of dynamic do you see that's similar to one another as far as behaviors or as far as how they deal with family and, that?
I think the biggest one might be the concept of hypervigilant aspects or elements, like I don't think either of them are very hypervigilant, but they are very hyper aware of what's going on and what's going on in their surroundings. They both prefer to like face the door if they are out somewhere. Um, Things like that. Or like if a suspicious person walks in, they might do a double take, or they might, you know, keep their eye on them, or things like that, I think are probably the biggest. I don't think that there are a ton of similarities. And I don't know if that's just because like they're so different in age, or or like they're both so removed from their careers at this point. You know, they've both been out for a while. But it's an interesting question. It's an interesting concept, because I do think, and I just mentioned this on my stories today, I do think like when it comes to vets, and this is something that I talk about with my husband, because he's also substance abuse counselor for vets and first responders. And when it comes to vets, it's like we have the education and the awareness and the knowledge that they are going to go off to war and see some stuff. And like, we can't comprehend what they're seeing and what they're doing. And then when they come back, we are more likely, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, but we're more likely to be empathetic to that, or to look for signs of PTSD, or suggest help, or help them get help, or, you know, things like this. I think it's just more accepted, or more awareness is there that vets go through things.
Yes.
And then on the flip side, it's like cops go out into their neighborhoods or into the next door neighborhood or whatever and see really horrific things. And then they're supposed to go home at the end of the night and just like reintegrate that same night. And it's like, we don't even talk about the fact that they might be suffering, or that they might be experiencing PTSD, or that they may have just seen a dead body in their neighbor's house, or that they may have just identified their neighbor as being the dead body in their neighbor's house. Like, there's just it's so strange to me that we don't, like, as a country, I guess, even, we don't recognize what first responders, but specifically police officers, kind of do and experience, and the help that they might need, as compared to some of the resources that are available to vets. Again, there's a lot of work that needs to be done for vets too. But, you know, law enforcement, I think, needs a lot of work in that arena.
Absolutely. You've probably talked to more police officers from around the nation than I have. I'm very central to New York. What are some of the common patterns or common struggles that you see around that police officers are facing nationwide?
I think the biggest one is in some of the smaller towns, the overtime as like a requirement. I know, you know, I think you and I have even talked about this. In some of the bigger cities, it's not necessarily as required or as mandated, but I think in some of the smaller cities, it's like they've only got so many people on the police department. So like, if you got to go in, you got to go in. And then with something like that, it's like, there's only so much you can, you know, do to avoid that. Which is why you shouldn't take on voluntary overtime on top of that. But I think that that's probably the biggest thing that I've seen come up. And then I guess there are other, like, again, in smaller towns, they'll take home the cruiser, which is something that you're not allowed to do, at least not in Philadelphia. They'll take home the marked car and it'll be in their driveway. So then it's like, you know, maybe it's like a red flag that a cop lives there, or it's a reminder of what your father or your husband does for a living. Um, so I think that is another one that I've seen come up quite a few times. That's very different from.
Okay. Yeah, New York City, ironically, we were forced a lot of overtime.
Mm.
That's one of the reasons why I did exit, is because of the mandated overtime, short staff, uprising crime. So it can be very demanding, and that's what I kind of touched upon as far as it affecting the family dynamic. With your father, that wasn't the case. He didn't have to do mandated overtime often. Obviously, he worked in SBU, so it required him to stay later to handle cases, but it wasn't to the point where he knew that he was going to be off one day and then the day before he was told he has to work. Would that happen often?
Actually, that's a good question. I should ask that specific question because I don't know for sure. I actually would think probably because, if he's working a case and they get a call that, there's a witness or a new piece of evidence or what have you, then he would have to, go in and handle it. So there was a lot of mandated overtime. But I don't know about like one day you're off and then the next day you got to be there. But I do know one time when we were on vacation, he was working on a big case and we were at the shore and he got a call and it was like the call, like they had got the guy or what have you. And he was, glad that they got the guy, but he was like, I'm on vacation. I'm not going in.
Oh, that's it.
So and so can handle this and I'll be back in 3 days.
There you go. There you go. Now, what ways do you think that, or would you like to see communities support police officers and their families?
I think just like you don't got to do big notions, big moves. Just think about what police officers experience and what they do. I think, honestly, people don't think about it enough. Everybody loves true crime. Everybody loves Law and Order SVU. They all love NCIS. Like, they love these things, but they don't actually stop to think that this is a real job. And obviously it's dramatized for TV, but this is a real job that actual human beings do. So think about that when you are dealing with a police officer, or if you have a police officer as a neighbor or a friend or what have you. Just think about the things that he or she might be experiencing in their everyday life and have some empathy for what they or their families might be going through. Because like I said, the biggest thing for me with the riots was like, I was blindsided by how people just cannot wrap their minds around the fact that these are just human beings doing their job. So I think more civilians need to just think about that and have that forethought and that empathy for them.
And what about yourself? What programs or what other initiatives are you working on to bring to?
Thank you for asking. So as you mentioned, I have my podcast, which is Beyond the Uniform with the LT's Daughter. And I'm loving doing the podcast because being able to just share so many people's stories has been really cool and such an honor. And I've been able to learn a lot about, like you said, policing in all these different areas. And then I'm also working on, so it's in the very green stages, but I am working on the Law Enforcement Family Legacy Project, which is going to be a 12-week program for law enforcement families to come and be together and have open conversations about what their kids are going through, about what them and their spouses are going through. I'm also going to have guest speakers come in to talk about like nervous system regulation, how to handle substance use or potential substance abuse, how to deal with safety, like you kind of mentioned, safety with your kids, specifically as a law enforcement parent, because that's a hot topic right now. So yeah, it's going to be a 12-week program. It's still in its very early stages, but that is coming up hopefully this fall.
So what would that look like? It would be an online curriculum.
So it's going to be Zoom calls, group Zoom calls every other week. And then there will be like a community aspect where there's a chat where people can continue to support and ask questions and things like that. So I thought about doing a curriculum or something similar, or even having like the stuff pre-recorded, but I want it to be digestible. I don't want it to be like a heavy lift for people to attend. I don't want it to take up a lot of time because, kids are in school, kids need help with their homework, things like that. But I do want, law enforcement parents to take a few minutes out of the month for themselves and for their families. So I wanted to make it, not a really big undertaking for them.
Got you. So if you were to wrap up your mission and say a few sentences, what would it be? Like I get that you want there to be more of a uh want people to understand that you're the daughter of a lieutenant, and what your dad has done for you with him being a police officer, and being able to still be there for you while having such a demanding job, and that you really just want the community to understand what us as police officers go through. But over like your main thing, if it was something that you just wanted to hone in on and get people to understand what.
I want to help law enforcement officers identify priorities and values beyond their job so that they can be present with their families and show up when they are home so that they can have a blessed marriage and raise the next generation of amazing people.
And I find that to be very interesting because you have had a father that's been so involved in your life, but yet you still push for that, even though you've already had that with you. What is it that makes you still fight for those people that aren't experiencing that, even though you have? What gives you the urge to do that?
Just that, I like the idea that I had this experience, the idea that not everybody has this experience that I have had completely just breaks my heart. I think it's just horrible and doing a disservice to children everywhere, and also doing a disservice to the parents, because I think a big part of it is that the awareness isn't there. Kids don't have the vocabularies. They don't have the words to say, I need help, or I'm struggling, or mom or dad's job scares me, or whatever it is. And I just think I was, like you said earlier, I was very blessed. I am very blessed. And I want more people to have the ability to say, I was blessed. And I want them to grow into adults who respect and love the people who raised them, and maintain a relationship with those people.
That's amazing. That's very, very powerful. And if if you had somebody that was looking to be in law enforcement, their father, their parent, what advice would you give them with how they go about handling their family and making time for them? What would be the main thing that stands out for you?
I think, well, kind of what I just said, identifying your priorities and your values and the principles by which you want to live, and holding strong on them. Once you get into law enforcement, there's a lot that comes with it. There's a lot of shop talk, if you will. There's a lot of, like you said earlier, coping mechanisms that are very normalized. It's also very tempting to surround yourself by only law enforcement. And I think just staying connected to who you are outside of law enforcement, whether you're a mother or a father or a son or a daughter, whoever you are, do your best to stay connected to that person and live by the principles that that person would live by.
That's amazing. That's
Hope
great.
that makes sense.
Oh, it does. Complete sense. How does it make you feel when, your dad's been a great officer, you've spoken to officers like myself, and then you see something in the media where an officer just totally abuses his authority?
Oh my God, I hate it. It's the worst. It's probably the hardest thing for me. It's harder than the trolls, I think. Like seeing that happen because, well, one, my first thought is I wonder what goes on at their home. Does that person have kids, and what is their kids' experience? And then my next thought is, people like that are why the trolls exist and why the trolls' beliefs are fueled in any way. And so they really do diminish the whole population. And because law enforcement is under such a microscope in the media, in social media, in the world in general, they stand out far more than anyone else. So when they do something stupid or they do something downright wrong, they're being watched and they're ruining everything for the whole population. And it makes me so mad.
Yeah. Yeah. It's absolutely disgusting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, how would you say that growing up in the law enforcement community has shaped, I think I actually touched on this before, but what do you think are some of the most misunderstood aspects of police work in the general public?
I honestly think that the general public just doesn't understand what law enforcement does. I mean, they think of law enforcement as the jerk that pulled them over because they were speeding, or the jerk that pulled them over because they have a tint, or the guy who told them to stop doing X, Y, and Z. Like they think about a lot of the more petty interactions that they may have had personally, or their brother or their friend may have had, or whatever. And they don't think about the larger scope of what law enforcement does do when it comes to saving lives, putting people away, just doing detective work. So many people, a lot of the people that are the trolls love true crime, but they never put two and two together that like the true crime that you're listening to, the reason it's solved is because of the hard work and the long hours that the law enforcement officers put in.
Right.
And I think that that's probably the biggest thing that people don't really understand. They just think about the cops in uniform who tell them to stop doing stupid stuff.
Right. No, yeah, and I get that 100%. And I think a lot of the trolls, it stems from, like you said, going onto Reddit or seeing what it is that they see on social media. But then it goes back to what I said before. You have some cops that just screw things up and screw up the perception of law enforcement and allow for these people to take the stance that they do. But I really appreciate your insight and just giving so much of your opinion and, sharing your experience with your dad being a police officer and what it is that you're looking to do now. And if you would like, can you please share your social media pages, share everything that you have coming in the future, how people can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually want to share one quick thing just on what you just mentioned about the crappy cops out there that kind of feed into the narrative that some of these people already believe. My husband was pulled over one time a long time ago, and he did roll down all his windows because he thought that that's, what you do when you get pulled over. And the cop was such a jerk. And again, I'm not the person who's going to be like, all cops are, like, I'm no bootlicker. And the cop was such a jerk. He rolled down all his windows for the officer's safety and comfort, but he did have tinted windows. And the officer was like, I know what you're doing. And he gave him all this attitude because he accused my husband of rolling down the windows to hide his tint. but he actually rolled down the windows to make the officer comfortable. So like, that's probably one of the things that really pissed me off when the trolls were going off on that tip, if you will, because like, I'm not gonna stand here and say that all cops are holy and wonderful. Like there are no doubt bad cops out there, and some of them are not necessarily bad, but on a power trip. And so I just wanted to share that because that's a perfect example of like what would fuel and perpetuate the trolls and their thoughts and beliefs, like you said.
But you know what? I'm glad that you did double back. There was one last question I did want to ask. What does purpose over pension mean to you?
Purpose over pension. I mean, I love it personally because I think in a lot of ways my dad lived by the concept where we were his purpose, his family was his purpose and his fulfillment, and where he got those things, and his job was his job. So his job never got in the way of his purpose, which was us. And so to me, don't let your job get in the way of your purpose is what purpose over pension means to me.
Beautiful. I appreciate that. And what's the relationship like with your dad now that he's retired?
Yeah, it's great. We go see him like once a week. We live near him now. When we were in New York, I didn't get to see him as much, but now we're in a neighboring town, so we go and see him and my mom as much as we can. We still get together on every holiday and every birthday. And yeah, we like me and my siblings will just go over and hang out with them because we still consider their house home and still consider being with them home.
Okay. Do you feel like he's changed in any way for the better? Like, is he less stressed in any way? Do you see it?
Well, he actually, until recently, he was still working full time, but he only just recently retired about 2 weeks ago. So he's still kind of figuring it out, I guess, but he is definitely less stressed and he is definitely more relaxed. His phone's not ringing all the time.
Excellent. So thank you so much, Captain. Like I said, if you could just share your social media, the initiatives that you have going on, I need everybody to know what it is that you're doing.
Yes, thank you so much. So my website is beyondtheuniform.co, just C-O, beyondtheuniform.co. And from there, you can find my podcast as well as information on the Law Enforcement Family Legacy Project. And then my Instagram, which is where I am most active, is the LT's daughter. So the LTS daughter.
Excellent. And how about apparel? I saw that you were putting some things out here and there. How's that going?
Yeah, I'm working on it. It's like a side project. I'm still trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. But hopefully we'll have something soon.
Excellent. All right. Well, keep us posted.
Yes.
Katherine, thank you so much for joining the Purpose Over Pension podcast. It's always a pleasure speaking with you, and hope everybody tunes in. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. This was awesome.
Of course.